Okay, the last video crashed, so this is why I'm turning it in so late. I don't know why the program keeps crashing a lot, but I'll do it segment by segment. So the first thing we had to do was complete stuff from sprint 3. I didn't get around to doing that only because this sprint took me a lot longer than I thought it would. And I had midterms too, so I had to spend time on that too. The first critter that we had to do was the flea. Flea was pretty straightforward. It basically just follows the queue system because I found it to be a nice type of system. And there's two queues. The first queue is the normal speed. The second queue is the faster speed. And basically, once it gets hit once. There's a boolean that's called can spawn mushrooms, and that changes to false after the first hit, so it doesn't spawn mushrooms anymore. And that same boolean is used to control which queue is being used. So when it's hit once, it'll get the faster one. And I'll show that right now. If at any point the frame rate drops a lot, that's actually not the program. The game itself, it's actually just a recording device. So there's a mushroom, shoot it once, it goes faster. And it randomly gets mushrooms. There you go, faster, and then explosion. There you go, faster, just to show the speed. And that's pretty much it for the flea. Okay, so the next thing we had to do was the scorpion. The scorpion was pretty much the same thing as the flea, except it moves horizontally, and instead of creating random mushrooms, it checks whether there's a it checks whether there's a mushroom there, and if there is, then poison it if it hasn't already been poisoned. And as you can see, the queue system. So basically, if it's past the border, it'll destroy itself. The way it should check right here. It checks to see if that the position it's on at the end of a queue is a mushroom. If it is, poison it. Pretty much it for the actual scorpion. So it was very simple to do. I'll show the scorpion here. And the way that it spawns, it does either go right or left. There it is, and there you can see it's poisoning mushrooms. And it has explosions, and just to show that it does spawn left to right. Try to get it to spawn left to right. There you go. So now it's going left, and it'll do the same thing. It doesn't always spawn there. It's just that's well, it didn't always spawn there, but that's a hot spot. Okay, and that's pretty much it actually for Scorpion. They're relatively easy. Yep. Okay, so the next critter we had to do was the spider, and that had to move either left or right only, and it also has to have a zigzag and vertical combination, and different death scores which are shown through explosions. So the explosion itself is pretty easy. I just have recycling factory with it, and then the explosion itself is just a kind of generic blank sprite. But once it gets constructed, depending on which score it is, it'll set the corresponding sprite to it. The spider itself was the hardest thing to do, but easier, or pretty easy once you realize how to go about doing it. The way I went about doing it is having a queue of queues, which seems a little weird, but when I was doing the centipede and doing that queue system, I really liked the way how we separated that one cell into a bunch of little segments. Well, I thought about it for the scorpion. You can do the same thing, but a higher level up, where you have that one cell segment being little tiny pieces, but you can also have a string of those one cell moves to become a bigger movement. So say I wanted to do a diagonal, I could just have a queue which is pre-computed to show what one diagonal cell movement is, up to the left or up to the right, whatever. But if I string 3 or 4 of those, then I have a really long diagonal, and I pursued that, and I really liked the results because then I separated the individual one cell movement from the overall movement, so I had two checking zones basically. So one zone was in charge of checking to see if we were at the border of the actual spiders, and that's here. If it's at the border, then basically just get rid of the current queue, which is the queue of queues. It gets rid of that so that instead of going along with the rest of what the overall movement is, just empty it. So that way, it'll be forced to make a new decision, and it'll also set the direction down if it's on the top border, or up if it's on the bottom border, and then it'll make a new move which is either randomly chosen, because choices are random, either downward or diagonal. And that basically just does, what that does is once it hits the border, it'll start going down in a random pattern. And the overall movement is when the current queue, the queue of queues, is empty, and if it actually completes its move within the middle, somewhere within the middle border, it'll make a new diagonal or downward position, and that basically allows the randomization that you see in the game of the Centipede, the original Atari one, where if you're in the middle, sometimes it changes up or down. It has the same effect. So yeah, that's how I got the movement down, and it actually does work pretty well. The death score was pretty easy. Just basically on the collision with a bullet, you do some simple math between vectors to see how the distance between them, and then you put in the lengths that you want to set the scores to be. So I have 900, 600, 300, and it makes that explosion. But it also adds to the wave manager, which we'll talk about later. That's a score system. But the Scorpion itself, that's pretty much how I did it. I will just spawn a Scorpion or two so you can see them, and then I'll show the collision with a bullet and how it does the score. Alright, and it does go from either left to right or right to left, but I'll only show one just for the sake of the video, but they do both work. So there you can see it eats mushrooms too, and so it moves in that random pattern. As you can see right there, it just moves from the diagonal to the downward. And there you go. Well, it starts spawn from the left, so that's good too. So there's a 600 points, and just to show that it does change, I'll get a little bit closer and try to get that 900 points. There you go. And that's pretty much it for the spider. Okay, so the last thing we had to do was the wave system and the score management, and I'm going to talk about those now. Those weren't actually as hard as the other stuff. Basically, the way I have the wave system for each different thing slightly varies. So the first one is the spider, and the spider basically just chooses out of two possible outcomes which one will it spawn, and it's either starting from the left or from the right, and that's pretty much it. And the way that the spiders keep respawning is that on the death of a spider due to the bullet, it'll send a message to the wave manager, and it'll say to set that spider alarm to a constant, because I found out in the game when the spider dies due to a bullet, it'll respawn a constant amount of seconds later. And the other thing is that if it's on the border, if it goes past the border, it'll do a random amount of time. And I have that shown here, right here, where it sets the spider alarm to a random. Okay. And the flea is a little bit different because the flea actually checks every 4 or 5 seconds, and right here. So this is sets itself back. It'll check every 4 or 5 seconds to see if the two conditions are met, which is that if there's not already a flea in the scene, and if the amount of player side mushrooms is below the limit. So in this case, it's 4. If there's less than 4, then it'll spawn a flea to get those mushrooms, try to get them back. The way that it checks is that in the mushroom field, there's actually now another integer where it basically just increments if there's a new mushroom created in the player area or destroyed. It'll subtract from that, and then that's basically it. It's pretty much it for the flea, except for in order to set this flea as in the scene back, I had to go into the actual flea, and then when it dies, it'll send a message to, where is it? The flea. Once it gets destroyed, here we go. It'll send a message to the wave manager, which basically sets flea to dead, which sets the boolean, that boolean which was in the previous code, to false. So that way it knows that there's not a flea currently in the scene because this flea already died. The scorpion is pretty much the same thing. Well, not the same actually. The scorpion is similar to the spider, where upon its death it sets the timer. I'll just show that. So here we have the wave manager set the scorpion alarm, and then just the constant time in between scorpions for now, just to test it. And the I think that's it. Yeah, for the wave system, that's pretty much it. The score system itself is basically the current score is just an integer inside of the wave manager, which by the way is singleton, because I thought that singleton was probably maybe be the best thing because there's only one wave manager, but the only thing that changes is the actual variables within the wave manager, like current score or what the current player is or whatever, and that can be changed dynamically and during runtime via composition. So yeah, that's why I picked it as a singleton. And then there's one method which is add to score, and basically whenever something dies, just like this flea, it'll add to the current score. And if you check that spider, the same way that it creates explosions, it'll give score. So here we go, the same thing, wave manager, add to score, 900, 600, 300. And I did that for everything, for the mushrooms and for the fleas and the scorpions and spiders. And that's pretty much it, I think, for the whole sprint. But I'll show the score actually working and the wave system working. The score is outputted to the console message system. This is not the score. This is just how many mushrooms are there. Just ignore this and the 49 something that comes out. You'll know which one's the score. So there's one. See, this current score is 1. If I destroy that 900, I get 900 points. Poison mushrooms are worth the same. So if I go 300, it'll add 300. The scorpion I think was 1,000. I mean not the scorpion. Well yeah, the scorpion actually. I'm wrong. 300. I'm sorry. So if I shoot that. Oh no, it was 1,000. Yeah, it definitely was 1,000. So there you go. And then 100 if you're really close. So that's now the new scores, 4,102. I'll get a flea out here just to show you the flea. I have to destroy these. There you go. So that less than 4, so that 3. And there you go. The score changed right there. Right there. The 200 points from the flea. And there's another 600 from the spider. There you go. That's the 600 point difference, just like the spider said. And that's pretty much it for the whole sprint. I think I've completed everything on the sprint that needed to be completed. I'll definitely fix whatever is in sprint 3 this weekend. Alright, thanks.